Buffalo got buried in snow. The city that never sleeps it off shut down. And with the kids out of school for a week, Elizabeth and I saw the opportunity for some much needed homeschooling. So day after day, we gathered the kids for installments of the Hobbit movies. We consider it an essential part of our parental duty, not only to equip our children for the challenges of this world, but also to acquaint them with the cultures and customs of Middle-earth. You know what they say. If you don't teach your kids about the Ring of Power, someone else will. Probably Led Zeppelin. Or I guess maybe it'll be Amazon, which used to deliver books, but now has the power to generate prehistory for the Tolkienian universe. Who controls the present controls the past, as Orwell said. The Hobbit was originally written so that bookish people, armchair homebodies with little athletic inclination and big hairy feet, could envision themselves whisked away on an unexpected journey with a kindly wizard and a rugby team. Good preparation for pudgy boys dreading a camping trip and girls getting ready for Smith College. Elizabeth and I both had formative relationships with that book. Now, my teenagers had seen these movies before, since we watched them every 5 years or so, but they came into it with only the haziest of recollections. Something fascinating we found: the Middle-earth literacy they came in with mostly came from internet memes. Like Boromir saying, "One does not simply fill in the blank," is a popular one with 100 variations, like "One does not simply pass Gandalf," or "One does not simply touch MC Hammer." Plus pop culture references like "and my axe," and the inside jokes that Elizabeth and I make while cooking, like "What's taters, my precious?" So for them, it was a delightful game of, oh, that's where this stupid thing comes from. Well, yes, but the reason people keep joking about this comical moment is that it was a minor flash of humor in an emotionally wrenching journey. Anyway, now we've once again carried our children up the rocky slopes of both trilogies. Connor did sleep through a chunk of the last movie, sort of like passing out for part of a car trip. We're back in the Shire already? Yes, you fell asleep. Now help us unpack. What happened? Oh, well, Frodo and Sam broke up, but Legolas and Gimli finally got married. Sorry, I forgot to say, spoiler alert. One thing that the kids found to be entirely underwhelming was the dragon. Now, here is where the strength of movie making fails. Because watching a CGI digital dragon awaken in the treasure vault or rain fire on Lake Town, no matter how expensive the special effects, cannot compare with sitting in bed by lamplight, reading and envisioning yourself facing this beast. There's only so much we can worry about Bilbo Baggins in the second film when we've already been told it's a movie trilogy. Plus, we don't fear dragons like we used to. Our dragon anxiety is at an all-time low. Giant beasts are nowhere near as frightening as microscopic virus particles and Supreme Court judges, whose lifetime appointments make them unusually susceptible to dragon sickness. Tolkien did not invent that dragon. He inherited it from Beowulf, an Anglo-Saxon legend he had translated into modern English. An ancient dragon has been slumbering on a big pile of treasure, and when a thief steals a single cup, the monster, being an uptight Anglo-Saxon sort of dragon, takes to the air, incinerating villages with its breath. King Beowulf comes out of retirement as an adventurer to fight the beast, and it mortally wounds him before he kills it with a dagger. The Beowulf dragon seems to have been borrowed from an older Norse legend of a greedy dwarf who killed his father and hid himself away in a treasure cave until nesting on this pile of wealth gradually turned him into a poisonous lizard. The theft of a piece of treasure will then awaken him, inciting a rampage, and he'll be killed by a hero with an enchanted sword. These stories have a fascinating common denominator: the dragon as a symbol of greed and laziness. Dragons have become symbols of various types of danger and harm. Old maps of the world used to use the caption, "Here be dragons," to mean uncharted territories. Ironically, the Here be dragons area turned out to be the Americas. In some ways, it would have made more sense, instead of naming these lands after a cartographer, to just keep the name, Here be dragons, in gold we trust. As a matter of fact, One of the very first episodes in U.S. history, in 1585, before the English even had colonies here, Richard Grenville landed on the future site of Virginia and met some curious indigenous swimmers. They had a little party on the beach and got along well, but when Grenville discovered that one of the natives had taken a silver cup, he led his crew to the village and burned it. Maybe he'd been reading Beowulf, but I think he missed the point. The British Islands were long thought to be a giant dragon who had gone to sleep half submerged in the ocean, somewhat like the Iroquois concept of North America being an island on the shell of a sea turtle. The ancestors of King Arthur were the clan of Pendragon, meaning the dragon's head, people who could somehow commune with the living islands themselves. It's an interesting concept that the island could be someone's pet. The mad monarch in Shakespeare's King Lear warns that his daughter's disobedience will awaken the dragon's wrath. English dragon lore was still alive and well into the Renaissance era, when it was still believed that the smoke of the midsummer fires could ward off passing sky dragons. This was important, since aerial lizards were believed to mate in flight, dripping their fluids into wells which would then become pestilent. The word dragon comes from the Greek language, possibly from Draco, an Athenian legislator who replaced the old informal oral laws with a written code. It was a tough code, ordering the death sentence for everything from cabbage theft to homicide. When he was asked why the law was so rigid and cruel, he answered that small crimes deserved death, and for the bigger crimes he couldn't come up with anything worse, so actually the cabbage thieves were getting their just desserts and the killers were getting off easy. It is from Draco that we also get the English word draconian, meaning excessively cruel punishments. And then, the kind of monster whose cup gets stolen so he burns a whole village was named after Draco, the dragon. It's too bad to see the word draconian disappearing from the English language. It's a nice word. It's also too bad that it's being replaced by words like FNAF and Rizzler. Some of the most famous snakes in religion are found in Greek mythology. Heracles fights the many-headed Hydra, who sprouts 2 new heads for each one that's cut off. Apollo kills the mighty Python. Perseus decapitates the serpent-haired Gorgon Medusa, whose looks can turn a man to stone. You could almost say, behind every great Greek, there is a decapitated snake. The Greeks loved presenting themselves as civilized saviors, rescuing the world from dangerous serpents. But we've got to be careful of taking Greek myth too literally, since we know from archaeology that classical Greece was built on the bones and ruins of peaceful utopias run by priestesses. A lot of this Greek mythology comes from barbarians rampaging through convents and then telling everyone that the nuns inside were scaly monsters, or a single serpentine monster with many heads. Heracles brutalizes the local midwives. It just doesn't have the same ring as Heracles battles the Hydra. This is how we get the myths of the Furies and the Gorgons. Medusa was a priestess, cursed for her beauty, the snake hair symbolic of mental imbalance, what we today would call PTSD, and then she gets decapitated and weaponized by the same kind of guy who turned her into a monster in the first place. The association of the serpent with the shamaness is clear from Greek history. The enlightened god Apollo slew the great Python, we're told, but the fumes of this buried monster's decay continued rising, giving visions to a priestess, the Pythia. For almost 2,000 years, the oracle in a cave at Delphi uttered predictions of the future. She could predict everything except a CO2 detector. But then, if she had, they'd have realized that there was a natural gas leak in the cavern, and the visions would have ceased. No matter how intellectually and philosophically self-congratulatory the ancient Greeks became, and these were the people who invented pretentiousness, Greek writers, from Plato and Aristotle to Diogenes and Herodotus, attested that the words of this psychedelic shamaness always proved to be true. The all-knowing Python priestess is one of the few surviving textual examples of the positive association of the divinely inspired woman with a serpent companion. But from prehistoric symbolism, we can see that this partnership was central in ancient spiritualities long before stories like the biblical Eden narrative blamed all of humanity's troubles on women talking with snakes. From prehistoric symbols and vestigial traces in mythology, we can reconstruct elements of belief from before classical Greek myth and history. In one ancient story, creation begins with a goddess, Eurynome, the wide wandering, who dances in the swamp of dark chaos, and her graceful movements massage the elements apart into sea, sky, and land. Then, taking hold of the north wind, she forms a companion, the serpent, Ophion. Assuming the form of a dove, she lays a great egg, and the snake coils around to fertilize it until it bursts open. Out of it come the sun, moon, and stars, the plants and animals, the components of the habitable world. Then things go badly. The snake begins congratulating himself and telling everyone he's the creator, so the goddess kicks his teeth out and banishes him to the underworld. In this story, the male snake is a necessary partner and protector, but once he starts acting patriarchal, the trouble starts, and the goddess punishes him. In Mayan mythology, the bird and serpent are combined in a single figure. The primordial chaos cannot be separated into sea, land, and sky without the feathered serpent. This is a special being who can travel all realms, possessing the scales of a sea snake and the feathers of a quetzal bird, including the bright red chest plumage symbolic of fire. As in other mythologies, the serpent aspect symbolizes immortality, and the green feathers symbolize abundant forest growth. In addition, this singular figure encompasses a spectrum of gender, being simultaneously the masculine snake and the feminine bird. This feathered serpent swam in the primeval muck where she encountered the storm god Huracan, and together they agreed that the chaos must be separated into water, land, and sky so that humans could be formed and begin farming. Ancient Chinese mythology contains dragons, both good and bad. Flying serpents are associated with dangerous lightning and much-needed rainfall. In Chinese flood narratives, a dragon called Yinglong saves the world by carving canals with its tail, allowing the floodwaters to drain away. The dragon is still celebrated as part of Chinese New Year parades in which dancers guide massive puppet dragons that slither in the air above the streets, purifying the houses and businesses they pass. In early Buddhist iconography, the Buddha is often depicted meditating under the hood of a giant cobra snake. In some renditions, a seven-headed serpent. Our first impulse might be to think, if you can meditate with a hissing snake behind you, you can meditate through anything. But the mythological explanation is that a terrible rainstorm arose while Siddhartha was seeking enlightenment, and to keep the pounding shower from interrupting his meditation, the king of all serpents arose from the ground and spread its cobra hood as an umbrella to shelter him. The snake has always been a fascinating symbol. For our prehistoric ancestors, the serpent emerging, shiny and new from its wrinkled old skin, must have looked supernatural, like a magical act of rebirth and immortality. Then, of course, there was the whole issue of poison or strangulation or being swallowed whole by some giant anaconda. As a kid, I was taught a song to sing while being eaten by a boa constrictor. Oh, gee, it's up to my knee, and oh, heck, it's up to my neck. It's a Shel Silverstein poem. I guess that's a pretty serene way to feel about it, although it's not the worst way to go. A guy at a playground park bench recently told me that the worst thing in the world was to be eaten by an animal. But I disagree. The worst thing is to leave your family with $6,000 in burial expenses. At least the animal can process you into productive fertilizer. Part of humanity's spiritual journey in all parts of the world has been coming to terms with terror, including the terror of the serpent, somehow integrating this into religion, not just labeling it evil or an eternal enemy. When we label the other or the unexplained as evil, we limit our own ability to learn from differences. Rather than empowerment, it's a hindrance. I think we have something to learn from ancient symbols of cooperation with these scary reptiles. Unless you run into a talking snake who says, "Don't tread on me." That guy needs therapy. Thank you for listening to this episode of Animal Magic. I am Jay Snodgrass, and if you like what you found here, there's more. Please stop by and visit j-snodgrass.com. Thanks.